Everybody, it looks like we have a majority of the council. This is a workshop of the city council to meet with our museum board. And, you know, just to cut to the chase, I think I would just like to turn the meeting over to our parks director, Stacy Barnum, who has got dual hats in this regard, as she's been helping us with as our staff liaison with the museum board. And turn the agenda over to you, Stacy, if you would please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm hoping that this will be a good opportunity for the council to learn about what the museum board has been working on since it was reformed in September of 2018. I know that the board has worked on a good presentation that I think will be informational for you. And so with that, I will turn it over to our chair, John Shaw.
Thank you, Stacy. I wanted to start off by just making sure we introduce everybody that's on the board. And I'm John Shaw. I'm the executive director of the Westport South Beach Historical Society. We operate the Westport Maritime Museum, the Grays Harbor Lighthouse, and recently we added the Grayland Cranberry Museum. George Donovan is another board member. George is a lifelong harborite whose family owns significant lumber mill operations in Aberdeen starting back in 1910. George is a successful local businessman with a local passion for local history that started at a very young age. George is also a board member of the Grays Harbor Community Foundation. We've got Mike Schmidt on here as well. Mike is a professional land surveyor with over 40 years of experience in the region. He's the co-owner of Berglund Schmidt Incorporated. And Mike has a unique knowledge of Aberdeen's properties, buildings, and local government. Along with fellow board members George and Don Lentz, he's a lifelong harborite, and he's a member of the 1973 Weatherwax graduating class. We got 3 of them on our board. They bring a great bit of local connection for us. Randy Bierbauer. Randy's got a great record of local involvement and history on the harbor. He was the co-founder of the Chehalis Valley Historical Society. He's also been the executive director of the Westport South Beach Historical Society, where I am now. In the past, he also worked with Grays Harbor Tourism, and he was integral with the historical Seaport in operations for many years. Don Lentz is from one of Aberdeen's oldest families, and Don's a great connection to local history. He's also one of the officers and founders of the Aberdeen Pioneers Association. Jamie Brandt. Jamie is a local restaurateur. Jamie is also the manager of the 7th Street Theater in Hoquiam, been involved in most of their restoration projects. She brings an experience and passion for old buildings to the area and her desire to preserve local history. Ruth is one of our new additions to the board, and she's also currently the president of the Friends of the Aberdeen Museum. Friends volunteers weekly with the Polson Museum, and we look forward to Ruth's involvement. Tawny Andrews, you all know Tawny. She's one of your council councilman. She is also our designated board representative. And with that, I wanted to introduce you to our board. Great group of people, significant capacity for local history and in service to the museum. And they're all volunteers. Stacy.
Thank you. All of you hopefully have received the information that I sent out to all of the council as some background. I gave a timeline of the different committee reports that came before the council since September of 2018, when the museum board was reactivated. As you can see, they've been busy over the last 2 years. There was a workshop held between the museum board and the city council in February of 2020. I wanted to provide you the minutes from that workshop. And with that, back to Chair John Shaw.
Boy, already. Could you click forward? I wanted to get back to something we covered in the past, but we have a lot of new faces here. 3 years ago, when we first came on, one of the things we were challenged with is right after the fire is getting back to business. And in a good organized way, we started with reassessing our mission statement. And at public workshops that we held in late 2018 and early 2019, we recreated and redeveloped the mission for the Museum of History, which is a core component of any kind of organization like this. Next. In case any of you have not read it, this is the mission that we work under, under ordinance. To preserve.
Can I ask a question? It sounds like you're showing a PowerPoint or something. Can everybody see it? I'm not seeing it. Are you sharing your screen?
Stacy's screen is up.
I can see it.
I can see it.
What am I doing wrong?
What are we,
Sorry.
technical issues upstairs?
Never mind me. I'll just power through. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, to preserve and interpret the history, stories, and culture of Aberdeen, Grays Harbor in ways that are meaningful to our community and partners. That's a very nicely formed mission statement, gives us some guidance. Next, we operate under a city ordinance. It's actually, for those who might not be familiar, where there's a city ordinance that guides what we do and how we think of ourselves. Chapter 2.6. One item is duties and powers. We've come across this a number of times in what we do and how we're trying to react. And one of the things I would remind people is, as the city board, we do operate within a lane, and we aren't, so we have to operate in conjunction with the city. We're free to do certain things, but we operate with council on any action going forward, because basically we can make plans and set direction, but we can't spend money. So next, Mike.
Okay, good evening, everyone. This is Mike, Chair of the Site Selection Committee. Just to start off, I want to remind everybody, in case the council isn't aware, that the museum board cannot discuss pricing and cost with building owners as we review things. So just let everybody know if they didn't already know that. Basically, the process we go through in reviewing buildings is to, all we have is utilizing the county website with their available data as far as building square footages, age, etc. And then there's a matrix that we put together in a workshop we had, where Dave Ward from the PUD came and led our couple evenings. That's one of the slides here. So in that presentation and workshop, we developed a criteria to review the buildings. One of the main items is that it be downtown in the core. We would reserve, well, we looked at parking, and we realized that that wasn't a high priority item. After looking at all the buildings, we realized that the museums don't really require a large parking lot. So on-street parking would suffice with something nearby. And then the space available in the buildings. We didn't really have a good handle on what space we need, because we really don't have an accurate inventory of all the museum items. We can see how much is in the warehouse now and kind of use that as a go-by in looking at the buildings, which is what we've done. And then the site selection committee, myself, George, and John, do site visits to the buildings when we can get access with the owners. And then we report that back to the board at the following meeting. So I don't know if, do you have the matrix up, John?
Mike,
Yes.
it's up there right now. Call Stacy. Are you seeing the PowerPoint?
I think
I'm
Mike's
just
on the
using my
phone.
phone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Stacy, go.
I've got it.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. So anyway, if it may be hard to read, but starting on top from left to right, we had the historical Seaport, the Gateway building as a point of engagement, if it's built, the Mork, the Aberdeen Mansion, Goldberg's buildings, Coffer's building, which has since been removed, the Kaufman Scroggs building, the electric building / Failers, the old Pay and Pack building, the Armory site, the Middle Swansons, the Salvation Army building, the old Sears, and then the Boeing building. So we visited a number of the buildings. We went through the Mork at one time. We went through Goldberg's building. We went through Kaufman Scroggs back in February of this year. And then we visited the Boeing building. So we pretty much, when we hit the Boeing building, we were all pretty excited with the past history, the space available, and it was just a pretty cool building inside. So that kind of progressed to, following the visit, that we recommended that the city move forward with a feasibility study. And then got some numbers, and this, again, the dollars were a city issue. An appraisal was done, and then the city met with the owner, and basically, I think due to the costs involved, the process on that site stopped. So we then moved another building. Excuse me, let me back up a little bit. One of the other buildings we visited that wasn't on the matrix was the Oddfellows building, where Windermere Real Estate is now on Broadway and Market. And that was interesting building upstairs, but it had been pretty much ruined based on, they put in the HVAC system, which made it pretty much not usable for a second floor for museum use. And then in April of this year, we visited the Wittemacky building, which will probably be discussed later, kind of as a point of engagement, also possibly where we could open up as a storefront with the Friends being involved. And then basically we end up with a building that we've looked at now downtown that remains unnamed, that looks promising. And so that's kind of where we've gone through. The process is, thorough, as much as we can do. And again, without being able to engage with owners and taking it any further, we just make the recommendations and then bring it to the board. And then if anybody else comes up with a building during our meetings, they throw out at me, I'll do some research, and then if we can get a visit, we will. So that's pretty much it. That's where we stand.
Thank you, Mike. Let's move on to George. We'll have time for questions. So anybody can bring back questions for any of this as we get through the presentation. George.
Yes, I'll give a rundown on where the collection has been for the last 3 years. And Stacy, we'll run through the pictures on the PowerPoint. And then after that, while I'm giving the little rundown, maybe you could jump around to the pictures if you like. But the first picture is up in Olympia at the State Archives. The state of Washington, the State Archives jumped in right after the fire with our pictures. And I think you're all aware, there's great news coverage of them. They won some state awards for this. They got in and they cleaned and dried all of the pictures that they salvaged from the basement. They weren't fire damage, but they were water damage. They were in about 4 feet of water. So they are in a very safe spot. There's 188 boxes up there. I was told there's about 5,000 pictures, but if you put just 100. There's glass slides and there are glass plate negatives, and there's negatives too. So there could be a lot more than 5,000. It could be as high as 10 to 15,000 pictures. Couldn't be in a safer place. Humidity and temperature control. There's one step left for the pictures, and that is to re-wet them and dry them and then flatten them. And then they can come back to Aberdeen. So those are the only items that are not in the warehouse. Okay, we can go to the next picture. That's a picture of the corner of the Annex building, which was the brick building across the street on 2nd Street from the Armory. And that's where a lot of artifacts were just put in there. They were uncatalogued, they were placed in there, but they also did not go through the fire. Next. That's another picture of the back room of the Annex where they had shelving. And what we did with that is we went through, there were 2 hired contractors that cleaned that room. It was a horrible mess, rodent infested. They went through what they felt was salvageable, and they got rid of what they felt wasn't salvageable. We took over a 24-foot trailer and moved 3 loads of items over to the warehouse that need to be gone through that may make the cut or may not. Okay, next. And that's a picture of the warehouse over in the Port Industrial area across the road from Home Depot. That's just one corner of the building. And you can see how the contractors got some shelving, laid out the boxes. The boxes, every box has shipped to the warehouse. It has a number and a written list of the inventory that's in each box. The bigger items were just put on the floor. And that's kind of where it sits, but that's just 1/4 of the warehouse. Next. That's a pallet load going into the trailer or being delivered to the warehouse from the Annex. Okay. The 1902 steam pumper, the 1926 Aaron's Fox fire truck, the old hand pumper, Old Tiger, and a hose trailer were all stored over at the Seaport. And that's a picture of those items arriving at the warehouse. Okay, next. That's the corner where that's just a portion of the articles that were removed from the Annex and brought over into the warehouse. And they're just dumped on the floor there. It's the most disorganized corner in the warehouse. And there's another shot of the far side wall inside the warehouse. So you can see how it's pretty well organized. People that have been in there have been pretty impressed with how it's laid out. And it's ready to be moved or to be worked on. Against the far wall, you can see some, let's go back to that picture again, Stacy. You can see that orange lines going up the wall and then across the wall. And that's a pretty sophisticated fire detection system. It's not a suppression system, but it'll pick up the most minute particle of smoke or heat and send the alarm out immediately. And that's a system that can move with us wherever we go. Okay, next. That's a picture of the damaged 1926 Aaron's Fox fire truck. It's been referred to as a Cadillac of fire trucks. It was used at the Aberdeen Fire Department for a number of years. I believe it lasted at the fire department until 1962. It's operable. It's been used many times. It was in a parade just a couple of weeks after the fire, and it was moved over from the Seaport into the warehouse. That's a picture of myself and 2 people from the Washington State Historical Society. And I will talk about them as we go through the rundown on the collection. Okay, I think that's it. No, there's one more. In the Annex, boarded up against a wall, we discovered a sign from the Spar, a neon sign from the Spar. It was the last sign hanging on the Spar, which was a bar, restaurant, meeting place down on Heron Street, down by the Finch building. Quite a remarkable find. It's going to be a neat addition or it is a neat addition to our artifact collection. Next. Okay, as I run through this rundown, Stacy, it's going to take 4 or 5 minutes. You can go ahead and jump back and forth to the pictures if you like. I'm going to put my glasses on. As we all know, the fire was in June of 2018. The artifacts were salvaged and moved to a national firm who has a plant in Kent, Washington, called Restoration Management. The pictures went to the state archives. The board was picked in June of 2000, or I guess it was August 2018. We started meetings in September of 2018. The city hired 2 subcontractors, and they worked the last part of 2018 at the annex. And in 2019, and later in the fall of 2019, when the articles were delivered back to Aberdeen by Restoration Management, they moved into the warehouse. Their contract was not renewed by the city at the end of 2019. After the fire, there was water and smoke damage to the hard drives on the computer. They were taken to a state history forensics lab in Eastern Washington, and they were returned to Aberdeen in early 2020. John Shaw and myself had one meeting with an IT person who had previously worked on the artifact inventory. Multiple deficiencies were discovered, as in lack of backup capability, lack of updates, need for new equipment, etc. Shortly after we got done with that meeting, COVID hit, and we were pretty hamstrung on being able to even visit the warehouse. It was a city facility. As we know, the city hall, you guys know, it was all locked up and nothing much was happening. We have a need now to return to that IT person, and we need some help in determining what additional equipment is needed, what additional work we need to do. And all of this we put into a plan that's, I think, is pretty close to being finalized, but it's going to detail the steps to be taken for each artifact to be verified as still existing in the collection, to be added to the collection, and if called for, to be de-accessed from the collection. Volunteers to be trained to do this with assistance from the Friends, of which several of the Friends are familiar with entering into the Past Perfect Inventory software system previously used and to be used going forward. The board and collection committee were not only delayed by the time it took to get the artifacts returned, which was over a year. The contractors did a good job of organizing and shelving and getting larger objects in through December 2019. We ran into that wall of COVID in 2020 that went well into 2021. So it's been a little bit frustrating, but the good news is some of this stuff is 130 years old, and it's not going anywhere. We have a need to find a facility, a place to work. We had shelving donated or brought over from the Aberdeen Library during their remodel process. And we need to organize and assess on the shelving, how things are going to be worked. We need to organize and assess the all uncatalogued items that came over from the annex. We have been all along in this process, and it's been led by John, and he can back me up more on this, and he's more knowledgeable, he can talk about it. But we've been discussing and utilizing peer review by looking at how other museums operate and how some of parts of that can help Aberdeen. And these other museums are extremely interested in helping us with this. But I do want to mention a few. I mentioned the State Archive, unbelievable effort on their part, and their willingness to help as we finish the process and bring it in. Also, the Washington State Historical Society. Within days of getting permission to travel, which COVID had restricted in the state of Washington, restricted. Maggie Weatherby, the head of collections for the Washington State Historical Society, and Allison Campbell, the Heritage Outreach Manager, traveled to Aberdeen. It was just in mid-August. They viewed our collection and made recommendations for Aberdeen to move forward. This is all part of the peer review, and it will be incorporated into the collection plan. They've also very generously offered further on-site sessions to assist in the work and to assist in the process and to evaluate what's going on with us. It's greatly appreciated. So that's pretty much where the collection has been. It's safe and secure where it's at right now. We look forward to beginning the cataloging process. There'll be several steps. There's got to be a lot more. There needs to be updates on the scanning of pictures. There needs to be identification of items that are on the floor or in the boxes, and get those updated and recatalogued. So that's pretty much my presentation. I'll be open for questions, and as will the board as we move on.
Thank you, George. Let's talk about going forward a bit. American Alliance of Museums, one of the first things that the board did when it was formed was review what we ought to do. We got some recommendations from people at the state, John Larson at Polson. We had already looked at some outside suggestions, but we joined the American Alliance of Museums. We went to the city council to affirm our interest in joining and then following guidance that they set out for us as we move forward to rebuild the museum. Stacy, go ahead. There's been a little bit of discussion about accreditation, and I want to hit this real briefly. Accreditation is a goal that may be unattainable for this museum. It was recommended to us strongly. George and I both reaffirmed this recently last week with John Larson and the state, that while accreditation is a goal, it is not attainable by every museum, but it's imperative that we follow what they call the continuum of excellence, which we've already started with. And that starts with commitment, core documents, and going through steps. John Larson, who's given us great advice, very successful. He's also a trustee of the State Historical Society. It told us before, actually myself, before we got on the board, that we needed to take Aberdeen through the MAP process, which is Museum Assessment Plan. And there's other steps in between. Let's run forward with it a little bit, Stacy, next. And so we talk about accreditation, but really what it's about is about raising the bar and doing the things we need to do to Aberdeen's museum as we rebuild it. I'd hate to think that we're going to lower the bar when we have a chance to reset it. And there's a number of pieces that all happen that build towards accreditation. And so I'd like the board, we talked about this 3 years ago with the council, to understand that what we want to do is move towards at least the MAP portion. Once we get past MAP, there may be practical considerations that would keep us from being a fully accredited museum. But we need to go through the collections assessment, the Pledge of Excellence, verification of core documents. Those are things that really we need to do going forward, and were identified in the past. We like to point at our neighbor down the street, Polson Museum. Polson did mapping early on as a small museum, and their MAP program is what identified the need for hiring John Larson. And John came on as part of MAP and then also has continued that program. Next. These are the obvious reasons we don't lower the bar. We want to continue to work on the guidelines to attain excellence. And these are just things that as a board providing governance, as we oversee the hands-on elements, we want to do what a board really needs to do, which is governance and oversight. Next. That's a map. That's what we end up doing, which is what we will do when we become operable. We want to take all the steps between now and when we have public engagement again. You cannot fully map a museum until it is open and operating to the public. That's something we brought up to the council in 2019. but there's a goal. We want to rebuild all of the things that we do in a manner that gets us there. Next. There's steps. These are things that are really nuts and bolts of things that we do at the basic level that have to do with bookkeeping, housekeeping, collections control. And these are things that we've worked on with the peer review by looking at what other museums have done. And a lot of this is just raising the bar as we move forward. Next. CAP is actually a way to get some help from the outside, which I think, as we all know, we're going to be looking, this board is going to be looking to develop a plan that also brings in funding and participation moving forward. Next. MAP is ultimately where I'd like to see us go when we're ready to open, and that's a goal. So MAP is, when we talk about accreditation, sometimes that's what we had asked for the council early on, was to take the museum through MAP. Keep going. Sorry, next. Okay, what are we going to do next? As the council is aware, there's been a discussion of a location to move the collection. The board has discussed for some time the need to move the collection to a city-owned facility, if at all possible, to avoid the monthly. Also get it into a place where it's going to stay long-term and be controlled. We're still in a location where we're in a month-to-month utilization. We are interested in planning to utilize the move and the handling as a point and a focus point to organize and redocument the remaining collection. And it's important that we do this under board guidance through the collections committee with the information we're getting from all parties. We want to utilize the new location to begin process of public engagement. Initially, we believe this new location is purely a storage and assessment area, but we are hopeful it will become a place where we can engage. We need to be rebuilding the collection. The new building, we hope, is a place where we can have what George refers to as a bullpen, where we can utilize the friends and volunteers to encourage people to bring in and access new items to the collection. And that's a really great way, without being fully operable, operating, to engage with the public. Next. Utilization of the friends and all city approved volunteers. I think there's, just to avoid any misunderstanding, the museum board has been a proponent of utilizing volunteers and expressly the friends in engaging and doing the work of getting back into the museum and in handling the collection since day one. We went through a great period of time when, due to the handling of the collection post-fire, the need for the city to have city employees or city contractors through the settlement, it wasn't practical. We've continued, we had problems with bringing volunteers in during COVID. It has been a plan of the board, or preference of the board all along, to move forward predominantly using volunteers, if we can work that out with the city on just how we will do that. We see a number of ways that is possible. Next. Good example, we had a discussion this summer, or earlier in the year, we had an offer to take on the Witamaki building as a point of exchange, a local place to open up with a local businessman. And we had the idea of opening a museum location, utilizing the Friends as a contract provider. Unfortunately, it just didn't work out. It wasn't the time for the city to go forward with that. There was still some things to work out, but it's a good example of what we were trying to do. But as we step back from that, now that we're not moving forward with a location, we're back to being able to work on this stuff as volunteers. While we were working with the city, we brought forward in peer review examples of operating agreements from 3 different very successful small cities in Washington State that looked at how nonprofit entities and the cities work together. And that's something we need to navigate coming up, but that's very likely the model going forward. Next. Okay, this is going to be, people have heard me on this. Museums are economic engines. They're important. We need to think of this museum beyond just being an expense when I'm talking to city council. This is a community asset. Everything we have in there, from what the goods we have, the ephemera, the old stuff, to our story, is a huge asset. Museums really become key and important to redeveloping an area. And we need to take this museum, and in addition to doing good museum work, we need to have it be that anchor for downtown to help with all the other things we're trying to bring together. And I think you have a board here who really believes that we can do that. Oh, I'm at the end. So anyway, I think we'll jump into Stacy. Do you want to round it up or bring us into questions?
Sure. Let me start my video. So this is an opportunity for any council members, if you just want to raise your hand, and I'll let Council President Shaw call on people. Do you want to call on people, Council President, or would you like me to do that?
Stacy, I am comfortable letting you manage this part of it so that I can just listen and we can all hear each other.
Sounds good. Councilperson Meskis, I saw your hand come up first.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much to the board for that great presentation. I know you guys have been doing a tremendous amount of work to get the keep the artifacts safe, and to continue growing the collection. I actually have a couple of questions. The first one's going to be a little edgy, but knowing what the old museum had and looking at some of the pictures and everything, a lot of the artifacts and history presented appears to be the settled history of the Aberdeen area. And I'm curious if there's any plans to engage with the tribes and bring in the indigenous history of our area as well.
I'll jump in on that. And I absolutely, yes. Early on, we had discussions with Coates about what museum discussion might look at Gateway, or what it might look at as we present ourselves again. And nowadays, as you go through the trust or historical society or anything with the state or federal level help, you're going to be asked to reach out and involve First Peoples, tribes, nation. And for Grace Harbor, George does a wonderful job explaining, and actually I learned from George, you want to start with the geography and why we are what we are. And Aberdeen is a story of being on a river and the great natural resources. And then you really have to go through First Peoples. We do that with our museum on the coast. You have to start with that First Peoples story. And so I think the museum has done that well in the past, and I think there's a lot more we can do going forward.
Okay, fantastic. And then the other question I had, sorry, Liz, just one more question. It might be part of the map process, but yes, the museum should be an asset to the city, but at the same time, at the end of the day, it has to pay for itself. So is part of that map process or part of your process to really determine how you're going to, raise funds to, keep the doors open, keep things, keep the archive room going and that sort of thing?
Yeah, Tessa, it is. There's a strong financial component to MAP program and to all the American Alliance of Museums. Being that our museum also participates in most things that they do, I will tell you that it is heavily driven by money, engagement, fundraising, and grants. And that's all really important. And what our operating model looks like in Aberdeen is something that we think is going to change in the hope that we operate within the core. Most of you heard this. I operate 3 locations on the beach. We do 16 to 18,000 paid admissions a year in a town in 1900. So we get 40% of our operating revenue from ticket sales, really operating. And Aberdeen, a museum in Aberdeen in the core should be able to add a admissions-based component to its operating model. There's also some really good operating models that we had on how city and partners work from Renton, from Auburn, and from Whatcom, where you have cities, where you have a nonprofit city partnership, where there's equal responsibility for raising funds and equal responsibility for administration. And those things are all out there and to be determined next.
Great, thank you so much.
I saw Councilman Rich Rod first before Councilman Ellis.
I know that you were talking about the accreditation, and just to get your take on it, what comes with that? If once if you achieve accreditation, what do you get with that?
Alan, all the way through the MAP program, you are going to increase your ability to get funding outside funding. It's also really, it's about professional and peer review. It's about running things the right way. Well-run museums, well-documented museums operate more smoothly, have fewer problems. Accreditation, not to back off of its importance, is actually a rarity that you can get all the way through that final accreditation. But getting all the way through MAP makes us much more grant eligible, makes us actually will give us access to other funds. It's going to give us access to the state money, trust money, capital heritage funding, but we need to operate within those kind of parameters. There isn't a magic, you're accredited, ding, 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 you will get money. There's also not a direct expense to it either. It's about operating correctly.
Councilperson Ellis.
Thank you, and thank you for the workshop. This is really wonderful to have a chance to talk with all of you. So at the warehouse facility, I noticed that there were boxes and artifacts directly sitting on the floor. Is that something that's of concern to you because of potential moisture damage, or is that ideal?
I can answer that, John.
Go for it.
There's certain parts of the warehouse that are not ideal. Almost everything of value in the cardboard boxes that are wrapped and packaged very carefully are off the ground and on shelving. A lot of the bigger items that are on the floor, a lot of that's on pallets, so they're off the floor. Some of the items that are directly on the floor have been fire damaged. And the state looked at that issue and had no issue with that. They had more issues with how to care for what's in the boxes.
Okay, thank you. And then, if there's a new building for you to move the collection into, John, I think you mentioned that the new building would be used for both storage and working on the collection, taking care of some of these archiving data kinds of things. No doubt any facility that you would move to will also need to be upgraded. And so I'm thinking of all the times I've moved into a house where I moved in and yet ripping up carpet and creating lots of dust at the same time. Would you envision that there would be the need to do a certain amount of work before the collection gets moved?
I would say there's work to do, not extreme. We're basically going from one location to another. So in moving forward, I tend to grade it based on where we are now. Just like you say, we have things sitting on pallets and shelves pending what we're going to do. Depending on how the city's assessment comes in on the facility we're discussing, I think is going to tier just what we think we need to do and what we can do. And again, we're talking to the group here that's going to talk about what that might look like monetarily. I think there's a little bit to be determined yet, but we're coming out of a concrete floored, steel walled location we would be going into a place that is in no way worse, in fact, in some ways better. We're not supposed to talk about details, but there are definite improvements on where we want to move from a custody and care standpoint from where we are now. I'm a strong advocate that the move is a very positive thing, if for no other reason that safety and ultimate care and custody of the collection.
And then as a follow-up to that, will you, do you see the need to still have an additional storage building for perhaps some of the bigger equipment items?
Personally, yeah, that's something the board as a group is going to go through and discuss. From my view, no. I think we have ways to work with the place that we're talking about. I also think we have we have a couple big things, and we didn't touch on fire equipment, but I have a hunch that we believe in some form in the near future we'll be dealing with the fire equipment. I believe that, which are our big things, the elephant in the room, where's that going to go? Very likely those are going to go, they're going to be in process for years being taken care of. So it's something that is not going to be, where do we put this next week? And we're going to get to that point.
And then lastly, council will be going into a budget process for 2022. How detailed will you folks be able to give us a proposal for what will really help the museum moving forward, especially going into 2022?
I look back to one thing, and that was, we had put a registrar again in our request with Stacy. Personally, I still am in favor of being able to do this work through board managed volunteerism. I'm a big believer that we need to engage with the Friends, but also with every qualified and approved volunteer in Aberdeen. We need to be real egalitarian and getting a bigger, broader area. So expense is going to come, that discussion of expense may come down to what will the city allow the board to move forward with? Well, we have coming together of we have a good plan for volunteer engagement under board review, utilizing these the core groups, including the Friends, to get our hands back on getting back in the museum business. And if we get the freedom to do that from the city and the city council, I think the spend's going to be fairly reasonable. We also have to consider what kind of money we're going to be looking at when the city does an initial assessment with the facility we're discussing, from keeping it really simple. I'm an advocate of start simple and let us go out and start working the system to see what happens.
John, can I add?
Go ahead, George, jump in, please. I saw you.
The first question there, Liz, there's going to be a volunteer effort needed to set up wherever we move to set up shelving, and it'll be part of the collection plan to be organized as to how those items get moved over there and where they end up being placed in order to facilitate the smoother operations of the past perfect recording system. So there's quite a bit of shelving and that type of work that would need to be done in a different facility. And I would hope that is obviously all done with volunteer help too, before the whole process begins.
I have a few other questions, but I'm happy to yield if any of my colleagues would like to ask some questions.
Did any other council members have any questions? Not seeing, go ahead, Liz. I'm not seeing, Council Person Katie Kochman.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about the cataloging process. I'm not sure I understood. Is it already underway, or it needs to be, or does it need to begin, and what that might look like in terms of a timeline, and if possibly you have, I'm going to call it software in place already, or if that's something that's going to need to be thought about in the very near future?
Katie, we have the equipment and the software, and we started in, as we walked into COVID, we started in working through the drives that were salvaged. Unfortunately, one of the things that we've faced is there was no offsite backup of the museum records. So we have what we can pull out of the damaged drive, which is a whole bunch of pieces. And so we're going to be reassembling that with the help of some IT people and also the Past Perfect company into a starting point as best we can. And then, I think the goal is to go through that. We have scanning to do, we have Past Perfect entry to do. And then there's an issue where we're still discussing. I believe that everything that was in the collection that can be documented must go cradle to grave. If we lost it in the fire, we must terminate it and deaccess it and reflect. We can't just throw everything out and start over. That's been a discussion. So we have a jumping off point. We have a starting point. And that's something why that George and I particularly have been wanting to push, because there needs to be a very organized re-engagement with the collection. We did go through a fire. We lost a tremendous amount of stuff, and we lost records. We lost, how do we keep track of it? And we need to pull together as much as we can. So I'm hoping that's helping answer your question a little bit. So we have a lot, but we don't have everything.
Absolutely. And can that process occur somewhat in tandem with looking at what the future of the new museum is like and getting exhibits? And I know I'm thinking a little too far ahead right now, but do you have to do A before you move to B, or can they kind of coexist?
Well, I think there's a concurrency to all of it. One of the things we've been talking about recently is we have great hopes in the likelihood we will be moving the collection. And so how do we move the collection in conjunction with redocumenting so that we maximize when we're touching things? We have George has been working on it. We've got feedback from the state head of collections, so that we do this in the most efficient way, but it is concurrent. It isn't like just, binary, I guess is what you say nowadays.
Thank you.
Did any other council people have any questions before we go back to Councilman Ellis? Oh, okay, you have the floor again.
Okay, thank you. Is a registrar the same as a director?
No. That's the answer.
Okay.
No, a registrar is a registrar. And, what really we keep finding that we need is a hybrid. And this came up from our peer review and also from George's discussion with Maggie and Allison. Our specific need as we sit right now is a hybrid collections manager registrar. We, in essence, have an undocumented collection in process. So we got handed here's what you do with an undocumented collection book to put everything back together. And we want to carry forward all the great work that's been done in the past, but it's a little tedious to keep it organized. So a registrar is just one of the pieces of it. We tend to refer to that because we didn't need a pure collections manager. We didn't need an executive director. We didn't need a couple other positions. We really needed to focus on documentation, we felt, as a core. And again, we're at a point where if we're not operating, I do believe, and I've always believed, most of that can be done with our through volunteerism and partner groups. We have a lot of good volunteers that want to do that stuff.
So at maybe the best scenario, how soon could Aberdeen have a museum that's open again?
It's going to depend on the assessment, the city's assessment of the building that we are all discussing. And what the city says needs to be done for that building to have public engagement.
And that gets determined in partnership with the museum board, I would hope.
Well, I'm sure we're going to have, have something to say about it, but I would defer to, we're going to have the city, that's a city thing to a great extent. You got the mayor, the city council, you have department heads that are going to determine a great amount of that. From our end, we would like to go into some place, open the doors, but we don't know if we've hit all the requirements. And that's going to be up to the city, I think. In fairness, Stacy, nod or say yes or no if I'm wrong.
John is correct. So if we were to purchase a building and if we wanted to open it to the public, that would be a government building. So similar to, library or even city hall, there are things that you need to have if it's going to be a government building open to the public. You have to have ADA accessible doors, ADA parking, ADA restrooms, public restrooms. There's things that you have to have. And as John said, until we have an opportunity to really assess the building, we won't know what that costs. So if we bought a building and we were working towards public engagement, then staff would go through, determine the things that need to be done, get some cost estimates, and then we would bring that to council and the museum board so that you guys can decide, how much do you want to spend? Do you want to do it in 2022 or 2023? I would be surprised if we could open for public engagement sooner than the end of 2022. The whole moving and reorganizing and developing a system for storage is going to take some time, I think, to do it right.
So we could even need as a first step to hire an architect who would create floor plans that show where all of those needed facilities would go. It seems like we need a floor plan before we can come up with estimates for what things cost. And that's why I was asking, will the museum board be at the table for that? Because that certainly affects how the museum space is used for all the various functions.
Well, I think if you ask any of us that have been through, and the whole board has been, we see all kinds of wonderful things we can do and develop. But we're guardedly optimistic. And so I continue to say we're starting with a place that is just a storage location and a working hub. My hope is that we will be able to get in there and work with volunteers who are probably on release and approved, so that we can conduct the core museum work that we want to do while we're looking at these other things.
Well, I'll end by just saying that as we, again, thinking about the budget process, I'm really looking to, it looks like both the Parks Department and Stacy, who will represent the city's interest on this project, and the museum board for guidance of maybe the bigger picture of what you need and what you would like to see us do to support this vision. You guys are the experts, and that will be really helpful.
Thank you, Liz. I see Joshua. Oh, sorry, Stacy.
Go ahead.
Running my own meetings.
No, go ahead.
Joshua.
Hey, I just wanted to say thank you for all the hard work. I can't wait until we have a museum. I have a couple of fossils that I've found over the years that I'd like to add into the collection, but I'm just kind of waiting until the right time.
As long as they came from somewhere around here.
Oh yeah, they're from.
Okay, all right.
Just some clam shells and maybe a snail shell.
Yeah.
I'll add some, John. The collection process, even without a bullpen, is still open. You go to the city's website, there's a one-page donation form filled out. It's real easy to do. Without a bullpen, it takes a little more time, but we have been accepting donations ever since the fire.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just need to clean them up a little bit more.
And in follow-up to George's comment, I'll be sure tomorrow to share on the city's and the museum's Facebook pages the process and the information for anyone interested in donating, so we can get that out to the public as well. Did anyone else have any questions for the museum board? Council President Shaw.
So in response to the question about what it would take to, have some public engagement, or what it would take to have a facility that the public can use, I just can't help but thinking back to the armory, which was gifted to the city. But that was not a direct expense to the city to make that building accessible to the public, and in many, many ways. So I would just encourage staff to work with the museum board to go out, and if we have a plan and we're willing to be patient and do it right, but I think we can, like they said, do it concurrently. We can find ways to have visibility and activity, but still be patient and have a plan and move forward. And all of this does not need to be a direct expense to the public in Aberdeen, because there's a lot of interest in helping Aberdeen be successful in this regard. And we did it with the armory. We can do it with the next location.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. With that, Chair Shaw, did you have anything that you wanted to add, or any museum board members? Anything that you wanted to add before we wrapped up the meeting?
Well, I don't want to wrap up the meeting without giving Mayor Shave a chance to share his thoughts. I see he's in the background there and he's in attendance. Did you, after hearing everybody, Mayor Shave, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I'm just listening. I think we're moving forward. Stacy, can I give a brief update on where we're at with?
Sure, as long as you don't disclose the location, you can let them know where we are in the process.
The city of Aberdeen has done everything required of us to produce an offer to the owners of the building, and that's all there is to it. We're waiting to hear back, and we haven't heard any response up to this point. So that's all there is to that news. It's exciting. We've, as you've heard, we've looked at a lot of buildings over the last couple of years, and this really appears to be a great choice if it all works out. So that's about it. I really didn't have too much more to go on.
Well,
thank you.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And before we sign off, on behalf of the council, I'll just take that leap. I want to thank the museum board. There's been a lot of conversations in the community, and even though we don't pay you, your professionalism and your staying on task and your willingness to keep going at it is appreciated. And I appreciate it very much, and I'm sure the council does as well. Thank you for wanting to come talk to us and have our ear and share your thoughts, and it will inform our decisions as we go forward very much. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Good night. And I'll be sure to email out the PowerPoint presentation to the full council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Good night.